Welcome to lecture number 42. This is the last lecture in period 4. This is topic 4.14, causation in period 4. It will be a large overview of everything that happened and will highlight some of the things that were most important. Most importantly, it will focus on the causes for all of them. The learning objective is explain the extent to which politics, economics, and foreign policy promoted the development of American identity from 1800 to 1848. This historical period very much emphasizes American identity and all of the things that led to its formation, like the development of a democratic society. This key concept says the United States began to develop a modern democracy and celebrated a new national culture, while Americans sought to define the nation's democratic ideals and change their society and institutions to match them. One of the causes for this was the peaceful transition of power after the election of 1800, in which Thomas Jefferson defeats John Adams. It leads to a more stable form of government and shows the rest of the world that someone from an opposing faction can take over power peacefully from the one that's already in power. After the War of 1812, a new nationalist culture forms because the U.S. manages to stand up against Great Britain again without losing independence. Thus, the new nationalist culture celebrates America for its institutions and abilities on the world stage. The next key concept focuses on the expansion of suffrage. The nation's transition to a more participatory democracy was achieved by expanding suffrage from a system based on property ownership to one based on voting by all adult white men, and it was accompanied by the growth of political parties. The removal of property requirements by the states leads to what is called universal white male suffrage. That means that all white male adults are able to vote. This grows the size of the electorate, those who are eligible to vote. An effect of this is that party organizations developed to court the voters over to their side. Party politics becomes really important during this period. The party system between the Federalists and the Democratic Republicans dies out shortly after the War of 1812 due to the Annapolis Convention. For a while, there was a one-party system during the presidency of James Monroe. Then, divisions within the Democratic-Republican Party after the election of 1824 lead to Andrew Jackson creating the Democratic Party. Jackson's actions as president are criticized by a faction of the old Democratic-Republican Party. He is accused of acting like a monarch and thus create the Whig Party, led by Henry Clay, in opposition. The next key concept says, while Americans embraced a new national culture, various groups developed distinctive cultures of their own. The regions with more cotton agriculture in the South have a culture that was more permissive of slavery. Slavery becomes a large part of Southern identity, even though 75% of Southerners did not own enslaved people. Though they didn't enslave people themselves, those who still supported slavery wanted to get to the point where they could have enough money or a plantation large enough in which they could. The regions with more industrialization were in the North. It led to a culture with an opposition to slavery. Northerners were advocates of free labor, that which is done by free people for a wage. Since slavery competed against free labor and it depressed wages, the North opposed slavery. Finally, regions in the frontier that are more underdeveloped lead them to support a larger government that has the power to put in place internal improvements and transportation routes that benefit the region. This roughly sums up how each region of the United States before the Civil War had a distinct culture and distinct views on government. The next key concept focuses on the causes for reform movements. Increasing numbers of Americans, many inspired by new religious and intellectual movements, worked primarily outside government institutions to advance their ideals. The Second Great Awakening leads to people joining voluntary organizations to support various causes to improve society. The Second Great Awakening was a revival of Protestant ideals, and some new religious sects and denominations are created as a result. The revivals compel people to choose religion, choose God, and become better people. As a way to become better people, they start to go out and help others through these reform movements. The intellectual movements that developed in this time period is Transcendentalism. Idealist, transcendentalist ideas lead people to attempt utopian societies. New Harmony, the Oneida Community, the Shakers are all examples of utopian societies. The next key concept covers the effects of new technology on regional identity. Innovations in technology, agriculture, and commerce powerfully accelerated the American economy, precipitating profound changes to the U.S. society and to national and regional identities. Inventions like the steel plow and the mechanical reaper lead to greater efficiency in farming. Farmers are able to plant more crops, harvest them faster, and ultimately plant across more land. Thus, there is a rise in commercial farming. The eastern areas are not going to plant their own food. They're going to start to rely on commercial farms that are in the west. The implementation of the factory system brought over from England by Samuel Slater leads to the United States emulating the British industrialization in the textile industry. The picture of the Lowell Mills in Lowell, Massachusetts exemplifies the factory system that used women as labor. They had to live in the factory complex and abide by the factory rules on how to behave. This next key concept describes the effect of transportation routes and methods. New transportation systems and technologies dramatically expanded manufacturing and agricultural production. Canals and steamboats make it possible to transport goods between the East and the West. The Erie Canal and the Cumberland Road, which connected the East Coast to the Midwest, were examples of new transportation routes that opened up new markets. The increased ability to transport goods leads to increased production. Commercial farms in the West are going to be able to produce more food that will be bought by people in the East. The people in the East are going to produce more goods in their factories and are going to be bought by people in the West. The changes caused by the market revolution had significant effects on U.S. society, workers' lives, and gender and family relations. One major effect of the market revolution on gender roles is seen through the cult of domesticity. Men are expected to be the breadwinners, working in the factories winning a wage. That relegates women to be in charge of the domestic sphere. The cult of domesticity proposed that women be the moral and religious anchors inside of the home, while the men worked primarily outside of the home. Women who find factory work become more economically and socially independent, like the low mill girls. Factories that employed women only hired those that were single and unmarried. Some worked for several years, though if they found a partner and married, they could no longer live and work on the factory. Despite the marginal gains on independence that the factories create, it does give a new generation of women that have experienced a degree of independence hope for the future. Thus, they will be more likely to join reform movements or the women's rights movement later on in the mid-1800s. The next key concept says economic developments shape settlements and trade patterns, helping to unify the nation while also encouraging the growth of different regions. The different regions begin to specialize in specific industries. The Northeast specialized in textiles and other finished goods. The West specialized in commercial farming, and of course, the South specialized in cotton. All of the regions are dependent on each other. The West produced food for the rest of them. The cotton that's grown in the South went to the textile factories in the North, and the factories in the Northeast produced finished goods that were bought by all the regions. The growth of transportation and communication led to a faster settling of the West. The railroads, the telegraphs, allow people to stay connected and allow them to live further away from each other. The next key concept talks about the causes for the foreign policy that the U.S. adopted. The U.S. interest in increasing foreign trade and expanding its national borders shaped the nation's foreign policy and spurred government and private initiatives. The Louisiana Purchase happens as a result of the purchase offered to France. Thomas Jefferson wanted to have access to the city of New Orleans and to guarantee trade along the Mississippi. Therefore, he made an offer to Napoleon to buy that land and that part of the river for $10 million. Napoleon counter-offered for $15 million, but included the entirety of the Louisiana Territory. Other expansion efforts that will be covered in more detail in the next historical period include the migration of American settlers into Texas. At the time, it was still Mexican territory. American Stephen F. Austin receives a land grant from the Mexican government and recruits American families to go and live in Texas. Manifest Destiny, the Mexican-American War, and the rest of American expansion will be covered in the next historical period. The second to last key concept says, struggling to create an independent global presence, the United States sought to claim territory throughout the North American continent and promote foreign trade. The United States was worried about the European presence in North America. Thus, President James Monroe and his Secretary of State John Quincy Adams issued the Monroe Doctrine. It was supposed to be a joint venture between the United States and Great Britain that warned foreign powers to keep out of the American continent. The United States at the time really didn't have the naval power to back up the threat, though they relied on Great Britain that wanted to protect their territory in Canada to help out in the event that it was challenged. In this period, there were issues with Spain and the British in Florida. When Seminoles attack American settlements in Georgia and retreat to hiding in Florida, Andrew Jackson leads an attack on them that nearly starts a war with Spain. It eventually makes the Spanish sell Florida to the United States for a reduced price of $5 million in the Adams-Onis Treaty. The last key concept covers the reasons for the expansion of slavery into the West. The United States' acquisition of lands in the West gave rise to contents over the extension of slavery into new territories. Cotton growers continue to move westward as the land in the Southeast is exhausted of its nutrients. As they move west, they're also taking enslaved people with them, which leads to this debate about whether or not slavery will be allowed in the Western territories. The addition of slave states would have upset the balance in the Senate, and it leads to the Missouri Compromise. Through that compromise, Missouri is admitted into the Union as a slave state, and Maine is carved out in the Northeast and admitted as a free state. The 3630 line of latitude, Missouri's southern border, now becomes the northern limit of slavery. Finally, here is the recap. A more democratic society arose from an expansion of suffrage. A unified nationalist culture arose from the War of 1812, while regional differences arose from geographic and economic differences. New inventions in transportation methods led to a market revolution. The market revolution led to new gender roles for women, religious and reform movements, interdependence of different regions. And expansion of territory led to debates about the expansion of slavery. Thank you for watching. If you would like to watch the next lecture, you can click on the video link on the screen, and if you're looking for more practice to help you on the AP exam, you can visit apushslides.com. I wish you the very best in all of your studying and look forward to seeing you back on the next lecture.